Hi Merfolk fans, I'm Joe. Thanks very much for joining me. I'm here today with a replay against Red-Green Titanship. This is a very difficult matchup for Merfolk. They often can remove our board with Anger of the Gods, get some blockers up with cards like Courser of Krufix, ramp their lands with things like Search for Tomorrow, and then before we can really do anything about it, either just kill us with a card like Scapeshift, or continue clearing our board with Primeval Titan and Valakut, basically throwing free lightning bolts at all of our poor little fishies. It's a matchup where we have to hope to draw pretty well. We have to sideboard very intelligently and just generally play really tight in order to have a chance at competing. So with all that said, let's go ahead and look at the opening hands. The opponent's got 3 lands. They're going to be able to suspend a Search for Tomorrow on turn 1. They've got Anger to deal with any aggression. Courser of Krufix, going to gain them a little bit of life, potentially smooth out their land drops, and get some card advantage. And they've got Scapeshift. If the game goes long, this is a 1-card win condition. So on my side of things, a handful of blue cards and a colorless land. Almost always an easy mulligan. It's always sad, though, to throw away 3 Silvergills, but sometimes you just have to do what you have to do. I mulligan to 6, and I see 3 blue sources, an AEther Vial, a Silvergill Adept, and a Master of the Pearl Trident. So I'd like to see 1 fewer lands in this hand, but it's definitely a keep with a Scry. So I scryed and saw a 2nd Master of the Pearl Trident. I kept that guy on top because this hand needs creatures more than anything else. Lead with Oboro into AEther Vial. Pass to the opponent, and we see that he draws a Pyroclasm. That's an interesting card to see Red-Green Titanship playing. They're almost all in on a playset of Anger of the Gods. This opponent seems to be hedging between some kind of split of Anger of the Gods and Pyroclasm. Opponent opens with Fetch into Shock and suspend Search for Tomorrow. I'm going to draw that 2nd Island Walk Lord, and against an opponent playing Tron, I would probably run out the Lord first, hoping to get a 2nd Lord on the table and play around a Pyroclasm effect. However, since after seeing the opponent play Stomping Ground into Search for Tomorrow on their first turn, I'm trying to play around, if anything, Anger of the Gods. Not even Pyroclasm isn't really on my radar in this matchup. So it's going to be better this turn against this deck to play out the Silvergill Adept first, revealing a Lord, to draw a card and get a better idea of what we're working with moving further into the match. Opponent draws a Forest for the turn, and they could choose to 1-for-1 me with Pyroclasm here, getting rid of the Silvergill, reducing some pressure on them. I did reveal a Lord, though, and keeping Pyroclasm and Anger of the Gods in hand is probably the safer choice. If my creatures get out of hand, they can potentially cast both of them in 1 turn to sweep away all of the creatures if the toughness gets really high. So this turn I drew a Mutavault. The opponent just passed without casting Pyroclasm on their turn. Silvergill takes the opponent from 17 down to 15, and with the opponent going into their 3rd turn, it doesn't really make sense to commit 1 or 2 of the Lords to the board on our turn. They would just get swept up, and it's just much better to leave AEther Vial up here to bring in one of the Lords on the opponent's end step to try to play around Anger as much as possible. On their turn, the opponent is going to resolve this Search for Tomorrow. They grab a Forest out of the library and draw into an Emrakul. So this turn, we're going to see Courser. They mistakenly run out their Forest, then remember what Courser does, and reveal the top card. They see it is actually a Forest also. So they get to play that one instead, getting some sweet card advantage, gaining 1 life, and passing the turn back to me. As I mentioned, I'm going to activate AEther Vial on my end step to bring in one of my Lords. I drew into a Master of Waves, and now that Courser is revealing the top card of the library, we see that they're going to have access to a Primeval Titan, and with them hitting their land drops, and with us with no interaction in hand, we're probably not going to be able to play around both Anger of the Gods and Primeval Titan. If we keep our board presence tiny, this Courser of Krufix is going to have decent blocks. So, I mean, one line, I guess, is to play out just the Lord this turn, attack with Mutavault and Silvergill as 4/4 and 4/3. Courser doesn't have good blocks. The opponent takes 8, but then next turn the board gets wiped, and we really only have Master of Waves to rebuild. Master of Waves, though, with protection from red, doesn't really care about Anger of the Gods anyway. So getting this guy out on the table sooner rather than later, in the event that the opponent doesn't have Anger of the Gods in hand, or has, for example, only Pyroclasm, we establish 3 toughness with the 2 lords and get Master of Waves out to sort of push as much damage as possible and try to race the clock that Primeval Titan is presenting in combination with the lands that he fetches, such as Valakut and a bunch of mountains. So again, seeing the Primeval Titan on the top of the deck, I thought it was not the time to play carefully around board wipes. So I brought in the second Island Walk Lord, play the Master of Waves, create 6 elemental tokens, and present a lethal threat on the opponent's next turn. I'm going to swing with the Silvergill Adept as a 4/3 with no good blocks. The opponent just goes from 16 down to 12. And at this point I was just crossing my fingers, hoping that he didn't have an Anger of the Gods. As it happened, he had pretty much everything in his hand. So he does cast the Anger of the Gods. Everything goes away except for Master of Waves. And we see now that he is playing the Through the Breach version. During the game, all we've seen so far is the Anger of the Gods, Courser of Kruphix, and a bunch of lands. No real confirmation during the actual match about which variation of Scapeshift the opponent was on. Seeing Through the Breach, we get a bunch of hints. We know that he's probably playing a copy of Emrakul in the deck, and that he's going to be going for incremental advantage with Primeval Titan triggers rather than the Scapeshift plan in most of his games. The opponent, after casting Anger of the Gods, passes back to me. Draw Spreading Seas, which is typically great in this matchup, but seeing the Through the Breach and having seen the Primeval Titan, I don't think this game is going to go super long. Would prefer to draw into gas here, if anything, but you know, Spreading Seas draws us a card, so maybe we can hit an Island Walk Lord off the top or something. Only hit a Mutavault. That's not going to really get us there. So play the Mutavault, and no good attacks through the Courser. The opponent draws their Through the Breach and sees another land on the top of their deck. They get to play that with Courser, gain another life. They go ahead and crack the Arid Mesa for a mountain. And with Through the Breach in hand, I think we're going to see an Emrakul here. Okay, there she is, and the opponent swings for 17. Now, many times, I'll try to play through an Emrakul if it's some kind of Goryo Through the Breach deck, or Jeskai Nahiri. Many times I'll have enough lands, or generally just enough permanents, that I can intelligently choose which permanents to sack and continue applying pressure on the opponent. In this particular point in this particular match, I only had 7 permanents, and sacking any combination of 6 of them would pretty much just put me out of reach of any hope of winning. We know that the opponent has another sort of win condition in Primeval Titan. They still have a Courser on the table. So after seeing the Emrakul, I just scooped it up. So game 1 going to the red-green Titan Shift deck. Let's see how game 2 went. So looking at the opening hands, you see that I had a Snap Keep, 3 lands, 2 lords, Counterspell, and Kira. Actually, this red-green Titan Shift is a big reason why I chose to add a second Kira to my 75, putting one in the sideboard on top of the one that's already been in my main deck. These decks, as I mentioned, I think a couple moments ago, try to get incremental advantage with Primeval Titan getting Enter the Battlefield triggers and attacking triggers, getting a couple mountains each time, in combination with Valakut, that's almost unbeatable since it's 2 free lightning bolts every turn, and that's not something we can really race. Kira, with her ability, tends to protect our creatures for at least, to at least allow us sort of one more attack step. By the time the opponent's getting Primeval Titan out onto the table, they're typically around, 5, 6, 7 life since we've been attacking for the earlier part of the game. If Kira can prevent Valakut triggers from eliminating all of our threats for just one more turn, we can often close out the game. So I found Kira to do a really great job in this matchup, and I'm happy to see her in my opening 7 here. Also really happy to see some counterspell action. On the opponent's side, on the draw, we see he's got a pretty sketchy hand with only one land. They do have a Search for Tomorrow they can suspend, a Farseek to cast on turn 2 if they happen to draw into another land, Path to Exile to remove my biggest threat, Scapeshift through the Breach, Primeval Titan as 3 strong win conditions. It's a little bit sketchy, but the opponent kept, and I can see their reasoning. It could easily go wrong, though. I guess they're thinking Merfolk's maybe not the toughest matchup. They've already got a game in the bag. This hand is certainly playable, and if they draw into a land or two, then it's just the nuts. So, opponent keeps and I keep. I'm going to play a Wanderwine Hub. There are no instant spells that I'm interested in putting Dispel up, and no deck in Modern will play around Spell Pierce on turn 1. They're just going to go ahead and play whatever spell they're going to play. Opponent opens again with a Fetch into Shock, going down to 17, and suspending Search for Tomorrow. I draw into a Reejerey, which is excellent. Having access to 3 Lords in this matchup is really strong, because if we can establish 3 Lords on the table, all of their toughnesses go up to 4, which plays around Anger of the Gods, which is one of the biggest concerns we have in this matchup. Again, not going to leave up Dispel yet at this point in the game. We need to be mana efficient. We need to present a threat early in the game, and there's just not really any instant spells that I'm interested in dispelling at this point. If the opponent has a Lightning Bolt, so be it. I've got more creatures to deploy, and we can keep grinding it out. But at this point, putting an Island Walk Lord onto the table is certainly the best play. The opponent does hit a second land right on time. Unfortunately, it's a tap land. Not too bad for them, though, because they get to suspend another Search for Tomorrow. So at this point, I have sort of no indication that the opponent kept a one-lander. They've successfully drawn out of it, and their hand is now looking pretty sensational. So I untap for the turn and draw another land. That's actually pretty good, since we've got a handful of 3-drops and a Dispel. So we're going to want to, at least on the next turn, leave up, play one of our 3-drops and leave up 1 mana for Dispel, and we'll be able to do that now that we have 4 lands. There's a decision to be made this turn between playing Kira and playing Merrow Reejerey. So the opponent is tapped out. It seems like it might be a good opportunity to play Kira, get her onto the board, play around Lightning Bolt, play around Path to Exile. Though I haven't seen Path to Exile yet in the matchup, I'm not really putting them on it at this point. But definitely Lightning Bolt. Kira does successfully play around that. Reejerey presents, a faster clock. I want you guys to pause the video for a second and just think about, which of these 2 creatures do you play this turn and why. So go ahead, take a few seconds and think it over, think about the rationale, and then continue when you're ready. Okay, so have you figured out which one you prefer here in this spot? For me, it was a pretty easy decision. I'm going to go with the Reejerey and continue sort of Merfolk plan A, just swing for maximal damage. Damage wasn't really the guiding principle here. It was more that Kira is part of our late game strategy against red-green Tidebinder. She is in the deck to prevent us from losing our board to Valakut triggers. The opponent's going to be going into their 3rd turn. They're going to have access to 3 mana, and if they're going to wipe our board, I'd rather he sweeps up these 2 creatures than the Island Walk Lord and Kira. There's only 2 Kiras in the board. There's a bunch more Lords. Going to be much more likely to draw into more Merfolk than to more Kiras. So just prioritizing keeping Kira safe for the time being. Side benefit, of course, is that we do get to raise the toughness and power of our creatures. Next turn, I'm going to have an opportunity to get all of our creatures' toughness outside of Anger of the Gods range. So I think Merrow Reejerey, the best choice all around on that turn. Opponent is going to go ahead on their upkeep and resolve the first Search for Tomorrow. We see that they grab a forest and draw into a Farseek. So they're going to play out that Farseek, get a tapped Sacred Foundry. So seeing white mana in a red-green deck could mean a couple of things. The most likely is that they're splashing for Path to Exile, but I'd suspect that if they're going to the trouble of splashing white, that they probably have some white sideboard cards as well for things like Affinity. They're probably going to have Stony Silence in the sideboard. Okay, so with only one red mana available, the opponent doesn't really have much to do, and they pass back to us. I draw into a Vapor Snag, which is a welcome form of interaction in this matchup. We've already got plenty of creatures for pressure. Vapor Snag can either save one of our creatures or bounce a Primeval Titan to allow us to keep swinging. So this turn, a little scary, typically playing out a Lord into open red mana, but I do have Dispel backup. Play out the third Lord, using the first Reejerey to untap one of my lands. Hoping the opponent doesn't have the spot removal here, because I'd rather not spend Dispel at this point. Seems that they don't, and I do get to buff my creatures up to 4/4s. With the second Reejerey on board, I swing for 8, and the opponent goes all the way down to 6. At this point, with 2 blue sources up, I have enough mana to have Dispel and Vapor Snag up, and I feel pretty solid in this spot. Opponent's going to resolve their next Search for Tomorrow. We see they get a Mountain. It's important to note that last turn they did miss a land drop. They only played the land that they were able to fetch with Farseek. In these matchups, it's really important to pay attention to the opponent's land drops, because they tend to put often 2 or 3 lands into play in one turn between Search for Tomorrow, Farseek, and their land played from their hand for the turn. Things can get a little bit cheaty sometimes if the opponent isn't really paying attention to what they're doing, or if we're not paying attention to what they're doing. On the other hand, sort of the opposite of them potentially playing too many lands, if they miss a land drop, that can be a real sign of weakness, since their whole strategy revolves around ramping. So they did draw a land for the turn, and we're going to see that. Looking at their hand in the replay, they have a ton of options. Primeval Titan would tap them out. They do have access to 1, 2, 3, 4 mountains. Primeval Titan could fetch up 2 more mountains. That would get 2 triggers from Valakut, and they could kill one of our lords. Vapor Snag, though, would bounce the Primeval Titan. The opponent would go down to 5 and 4 from his Arid Mesa. And then, of course, after bouncing the Primeval Titan, we can just swing for 6 and win. So Primeval Titan, not a winning line by himself. Through the Breach threatens to get Enter the Battlefield triggers and attacking triggers for a lot more Valakut damage. But Through the Breach, as an instant, is vulnerable to Dispel. So that line doesn't get there either in this spot. Scapeshift really requires the Valakut player to be on 7 lands minimum before they cast Scapeshift, because Valakut needs at least 6 mountains to enter the battlefield at the same time so that they all see each other. So at only 6 lands, Scapeshift is not an option, and yeah, Through the Breach in combination with Path to Exile, just not really great because I have the Dispel and the Vapor Snag. So let's go ahead and see which option the opponent chose. Actually, one more small thing to remark on. For those of you who don't really play, that haven't really played this matchup too much, the deck tends to play Through the Breach as a sorcery speed spell. They'll do it on their main phase so that they just get Primeval Titan onto the battlefield and then attack with him. But it is in fact an instant, which makes it actually better for us because it turns our Dispel on. So important to note that if you're playing against Goryo, Through the Breach, or red-green Titan Shift, Dispel is a really fantastic and powerful card in the matchup. So the opponent starts by cracking their Arid Mesa, going down to 5. They're going to tap 5 mana for Through the Breach, but we have the Dispel up. They can't be too happy to see that. They do have Sacred Foundry up for Path to Exile, but they're going to pass to our turn and realize, I think, that it's not enough. I turn my creature sideways, swinging for 12, 4, 4, and 4, and the opponent just scooped it up at that point. So game 2 to Merfolk. Early aggression backed up by counter magic. Couldn't have drawn it up any better. So going into game 3, let's look at the opening hands. The opponent has 2 shock lands, Path to Exile for removal, Courser for blocks, and for some life gain, Farseek for ramp. Anger to kill all my Merfolk, and Scapeshift to win the game. So excellent hand on their side. On our side of things, we have a blue source, an AEther Vial, a 1-drop Merfolk, 2-drop, and 3-drop, with Kira and Negate. So this hand is just as good as I could have hoped it for in this matchup. So 2 strong hands. Hopefully it'll be a great match. So 2 keeps. Opponent's going to open with tapped Stomping Grounds. For my draw step, I hit a second island. It's excellent to see a second land. I was a little bit afraid seeing that it's an island. I have encountered Boil out of the sideboard in another red-green Titan deck. So I don't really want my 2 islands to get boiled, but better to have access to lands than to not, even if they are both basic islands. So the opponent is going to play an untapped Stomping Ground and resolve a Farseek here. They're going to get that tapped Sacred Foundry, again hinting that they may be playing Path to Exile. I'm going to take AEther Vial up on my turn. I draw into another Lord. Those guys really important in the matchup, as I've gone over already. Easy play this turn. Get Silvergill on the board. I'm going to reveal a Reejerey instead of the Cursecatcher, hoping to catch the opponent off guard on their turn. And I drew into that 3rd Lord, so feeling really, really good about this hand right now. Opponent, right on time, hits a land to play on their 3rd turn. They're going to start with Courser of Krufix, wisely revealing the top card before choosing to play a land from hand. Since it's not a land, they go ahead, play the Mountain from their hand, gain 1 life from the Courser, and just pass the turn back to me. I'm going to activate AEther Vial, wait for the opponent, and he says it's okay. So there's Cursecatcher. Take AEther Vial up to 2 and draw my 3rd land right on time. Things going really well for us so far. Similar to believe it was the first game, going to choose here to pass the turn to the opponent rather than putting any other Merfolk onto the board right now. Just playing around Anger of the Gods to the best of my ability. If we pass the turn and the opponent passes the turn back, we can end step, bring a Lord in, and then put 2 more Lords in the next turn, getting the creature's toughness up to 4. Another possibility is to put a Lord in now and try to bait an Anger of the Gods, in which case we could have mana up to negate it. But I think we have better options. So we see the opponent is going to draw this Search for Tomorrow, and so far we have information about that card and this Primeval Titan coming up. So this turn, the opponent is going to get both of these Search for Tomorrows suspended, tapping their 2 Stomping Grounds, and simply passing the turn after that. So again, really, really important to note that they didn't make their land drop here. They do have 2 Search for Tomorrows suspended, which will immediately throw them up to 6 lands, but we do have a small window of opportunity here. So going into our turn, I'm going to activate this AEther Vial at the opponent's end step to get that Lord onto the table. At my end step, the opponent could have chosen to path him. I probably would have responded with Negate just because we have the 2 Lords in hand, and those guys would effectively play around Anger of the Gods without needing Negate for Anger of the Gods. But the opponent chose to pass the turn to me. I'm going to take AEther Vial up to 3 for sure here, since I have 3 3-drops. And for the turn, I drew into Cursecatcher. With the opponent having missed a land drop, having access to 2 Cursecatchers is potentially really strong in this spot. Missed their land drop, and we see that they don't have a land on top of their deck. 2 Cursecatchers could also potentially jam up an Anger of the Gods. So one more time, I'm going to pause here, or ask you guys to pause, and think about what your approach is for this turn. We have so many options, different ways of protecting our creatures, different ways of advancing our board state. Go ahead and pause the game and take a minute to think about how you would play out this situation. Okay, so do you have some idea about what your approach is? Do you play Reejerey or Kira? What are we tapping and untapping? What are we countering or not countering? So with multiple Merrow Reejereys in hand and an AEther Vial on 3, it's very easy to get excited and make suboptimal plays. As it went in this game, the actual line I chose was really suboptimal, not that great. So let's go ahead and look at my play, and then I'll follow up with a discussion of what the actual optimal approach would have been. So for this turn, I did take quite a while to figure out my line, but it was definitely going to start with Merrow Reejerey. My idea is that, you know, Reejerey opens up so many possibilities with tapping and untapping that bringing him in with AEther Vial first is sort of like the, you know, the top of the decision tree before it starts branching out in other directions. So we'll get Reejerey on the table, and then I did spend quite a while thinking about, you know, how to move forward from there. Do I play the Reejerey first? Do I play a Cursecatcher first? What do I target with the untap trigger with the Reejerey that we've established on the table? So I think I actually took, you know, a couple minutes here. I apologize to the opponent because our turns don't typically take very long, but every now and then we do encounter a situation where we need to go pretty deep into the tank. And since our games can be pretty quick, I don't really feel bad about taking a minute or two sometimes. Ultimately here, my play was kind of greedy, sort of a self-contradictory line of play. With two Reejereys in hand, I saw the opportunity to dump my entire hand, get all the creatures onto the table. So after vialing in the first Reejerey, I decided to cast my Cursecatcher using the untap trigger to target my land. So let's go ahead here. Cast the Cursecatcher, targeting the land. And my plan, of course, was to follow up with casting the second Reejerey, untapping AEther Vial, and putting Kira into play. The big problem with this line is that if the opponent casts spot removal on the first Reejerey on the table with Cursecatcher on the stack, I no longer have a way to untap my AEther Vial. If I cast Negate on the spot removal, I'll be left with only two lords on the table, vulnerable to Anger of the Gods if the opponent happens to draw a land next turn. As we can see, this is exactly how you know, things go. So, in response to the untap trigger, the opponent is going to cast Path wisely, targeting Merrow Reejerey. Now, I sort of snap negated that. I didn't really give it a lot of thought. As I mentioned, my play here was far from optimal, but Negate resolves, Path gets countered, the land is going to untap, and Cursecatcher is going to enter the battlefield. Now, at this point, I felt a little bit frustrated with myself because I didn't quite think through my options as thoroughly as I could have, as accurately as I could have. A slightly better line, I think, in retrospect, than this one, though it's still not the best, would have been to lead with Cursecatcher if I wanted to target a land to untap. Because if I lead with Reejerey instead of Cursecatcher, and then target my land to untap, even if the opponent paths this first Reejerey, the land will still untap. I'll still get a Reejerey on the table. I can cast Cursecatcher with that land and untap AEther Vial and get Kira onto the table. We'll still have the two Cursecatchers and cross our fingers and hope the opponent doesn't draw another land to play around the two Cursecatcher effects. But I would still have a Reejerey on table and be able to get Kira onto the board. But both of these lines would attempt to play for maximum Reejerey value, giving us the potential, at least, to dump all of our creatures onto the table. It's really greedy, though, because in the event that the opponent has spot removal, as they did in this game, both of these lines would leave our creatures with only 3 toughness and no negate backup against Anger of the Gods. So after this match, I spent the rest of yesterday, I was just thinking about it all day, and I believe that I've sort of come to an understanding of the best line, the best way to think about our approach in this situation. So I would very much like to discuss it before moving on. Unfortunately, Cockatrice doesn't have a rewind feature, so I'm just going to go ahead and open up the game again and just fast forward through most of the game just to get back to that spot. It won't take very long, maybe just 30 seconds or something. And you guys get to watch all the action again quickly. I'm going to see Courser, play the Mountain. Here's a Cursecatcher. This is the turn where I just pass to the opponent, planning on bringing in a Lord on the opponent's end step. I see they drew a Search for Tomorrow. Going to suspend both of those guys. and on their end step I'll bring in a Lord, and then we can go ahead and just pause it when we draw the Cursecatcher. Alright, so looking at our board state, we have a decent presence with a handful of gas and an active Aether Vial with a handful of creatures that we can use Aether Vial to get onto the table. The opponent just missed a land drop. They only have 3 cards in hand. We're in a very good spot, but this is a really critical turn. As long as we don't make any big missteps, we should have a great shot at winning this game. As always, our 2 primary goals are to expand our board and to protect the board. We have a great selection of cards to accomplish these goals. To protect our board, we have to consider both spot removal and sweepers. Negate does a great job against both forms of removal, while Kira only does a good job against spot removal. If possible, we should do our best to play around both forms of removal. That just makes sense. To do so, we have 2 options this turn. The first option is to get both Reejereys on the table this turn, no matter what, spending the negate if necessary to counter any spot removal. This would get all our creatures' toughness up to 4, effectively playing around Anger of the Gods on the opponent's turn. This line would begin with tapping Aether Vial for Reejerey, as I did in the game. So go ahead and fast forward a little bit, just until we get that Reejerey on the table. Okay. If the opponent casts... Sorry, where am I looking here? The idea here is to get both Reejereys on the table no matter what. So after putting this Reejerey on the table, I can then cast Cursecatcher, target the Aether Vial to untap. If the opponent plays spot removal in response to Cursecatcher, we can cast Negate to counter the spot removal. All of our creatures will have 4 toughness, and that will effectively play around Anger of the Gods, since our creatures won't die to the 3 damage, and we'll also have 2 Cursecatchers on the table to back up the 4 toughness, even in the event that the opponent doesn't draw a land for their turn. So that's option 1. Push our lords using counter magic to maximize the toughness of our creatures. That would be an effective line this turn. The second approach, which I believe is the stronger of the 2 options for protecting against both spot removal and sweepers this turn, would be to begin the turn with activating Aether Vial and waiting to see what the opponent's response is. So just imagine this Reejerey isn't on the table yet. We've activated Aether Vial. We ask the opponent, is Vial okay, as I always do. And as soon as the opponent says okay, that should be sort of a green light to put Kira into play. Kira on the board plays around spot removal without having to waste our precious negate. With Kira in play, we could cast our second Cursecatcher, not getting any tapping and untapping triggers, but that's really not the most important thing. Again, the goals are to protect our creatures from spot removal and board wipes. Getting Kira onto the board through Aether Vial uses Aether Vial in sort of to the fullest extent. The opponent hasn't seen a Kira yet in this match, so they go ahead and, I should expect them to say that Aether Vial is okay. They've seen plenty of Reejereys. They're 100% expecting Reejerey, so they don't cast any removal in response to the activation, and we could have slipped Kira into play to get really robust protection from spot removal without having to waste our negate. So again, activate Aether Vial, wait for the opponent's response. If they say it's okay, put Kira in, follow up with Cursecatcher, leaving 2 mana up for negate for Anger of the Gods. So negate and Kira would definitely be enough to get us safely to our next turn, when we could then easily get the 2 Merrow Reejereys onto the board. Still having 2 Cursecatchers backing us up. Negate could counter Anger of the Gods. So yes, activating Aether Vial and waiting for the opponent's response would definitely have been the best line. If you didn't quite understand all of that, didn't catch some of the details, please rewind and listen to this one more time, because I was only able to come up to sort of a clear understanding of the dynamics of this turn after thinking about it for hours yesterday. It was definitely a learning experience for me, and I hope some of you guys can benefit from it as well. That all being said, I'm just going to go ahead and catch up. I'm going to fast forward through this lull again. When I sort of went into the tank and came out with the incorrect conclusion. At this point, I should have Kira on the board, but Reejerey still presents us with you know, a decent option. I should have played Cursecatcher, targeting the AEther Vial, with the intention of countering any spot removal and then getting a third Lord on the table. As it went, we saw, as I mentioned, I took the greedy route, trying to dump my whole hand, and as a result, I'm going to lose my Reejerey, or sorry, risked losing my Reejerey. As it went, I cast Negate to save him. In the end, the Cursecatcher will resolve, but I won't get to untap my AEther Vial, losing a lot of potential value with these two guys still stuck in my hand. I'm going to swing with the Silvergill as a 4-3. The opponent's almost definitely not going to trade, trade block and chump with the Courser. See, the opponent is drawing a Primeval Titan after ticking their Search for Tomorrows down, and miraculously for us, through our misplay here, they did not top deck a land, even with their two opportunities, with Courser giving them the option of playing off the top of the deck. I think the opponent realizes that they're going to lose the game next turn if they don't at least go for Anger of the Gods. They're going to force me to sack the two Cursecatchers, and of course that's what I'm going to do. And so they just pass back to me. I drew a Mutavault for the turn, and as I mentioned, it's going to be pretty easy this turn to just get the rest of our creatures onto the board. Deploy Kira with AEther Vial. Then casting the Merrow Reejerey is going to get me a tap trigger. I can tap down the Courser of Krufix and swing for as much damage as possible. As it was 4, 4, and 5, so that's 13 damage, taking the opponent all the way down to 2. So they draw their Primeval Titan. Well, not quite yet. They're going to resolve their two Search for Tomorrows, getting 2 forests and going from 2 life up to 4 life. So after they resolved those Search for Tomorrows and shuffled, we only saw it for a brief instant before they drew, but we saw that they drew a Search for Tomorrow and then revealed another Primeval Titan. So this turn, if we think about what their options are given the cards in hand, similar to the second game where they had Scapeshift in hand, 6 lands isn't going to get them there. They need 7 for Scapeshift to be effective. And even with 7 lands, Scapeshift wouldn't be effective because I'm at 20 life, and 7 lands with a Scapeshift only does 18 damage, so I would live through that. I can block a Courser, no problem. So Scapeshift not looking so great. Primeval Titan, hard cast, without Through the Breach, only gets 2 triggers, and with access to 4 mountains here, they could only get something like a mountain and a Valakut, but that would get no triggers. 2 mountains by themselves obviously get no Valakut triggers, and 2 Valakuts, you know, again, doesn't get any triggers. So Primeval Titan also not looking like a great option. Search for Tomorrow doesn't seem like it would do very much, but it actually is their best option to lead with here, because it gets them to their 7th land and leaves exactly 4 lands for Scapeshift. So going to fast forward a little bit. The opponent also sort of went into the tank this turn and ultimately decided to go with Search for Tomorrow. They got another forest, reveal a Through the Breach, but they're not going to be drawing that this turn. And continuing to fast forward, the opponent is going to go for Scapeshift. We see they're going to be sacking 2 Stomping Grounds, 3 forests, a Sacred Foundry, and a mountain, looking for some combination of 6 mountains and a Valakut. So the opponent here is going to go up from 4 life with 7 triggers from Courser of Krufix. They're now all the way back up at 11. This is looking like it's going to be 18 damage thrown at our faces, but the opponent, I think it's a little bit strange here because they've played really tight all game. Even through the replay where we can see all of their cards, they've made intelligent decisions at every step. So it's a little bit weird that they're going for 2 Valakuts with 5 lands here. I'm going to tell them that there are no triggers because you need a 6th mountain for any triggers. He says I control 5. I say you need 5 others. Other is the important word. They enter at the same time, triggering. I don't know what he's doing here. Maybe he's trying to lie because he feels like he's going to lose. I don't think that's the case. I just think maybe you know, sometimes we make weird mistakes playing Magic. long games with long pauses can lead our brains in strange directions. So I just tell him, no, they all have to see 5 others. You need 6. If you want, I can Google it, I get you a link. You can only do 18 to me right now. So opponent thinks about it, backs up, gets another mountain, of course, and I say, okay, I'm going down to 2. But the opponent's saying, hang on. And he's going to start thinking about how to use his triggers, but then, of course, starts thinking about Kira. Fast forward a little bit more, thinking a little bit more about it. In the end, the opponent said to me, nope, you got it, good game. So this whole time, it's quite a long pause. I was thinking that, he had a pretty good line, and I told him about it. I said, what were you thinking about, if you don't mind discussing it? Because I thought that he had a good line. Send 2 triggers at Kira, that kills her. Send 2 at a Lord, that will kill it. Then send 1 other trigger at each of the other 3 3s. So 6 triggers leaves me only with Silvergill and Mutavault against a Courser of Kruphix, a Primeval Titan in hand, and the opponent at 11 life. The opponent's response, though, is very interesting, and I definitely learned a lot this match. The opponent told me that that's not quite right because the stacking won't work because he has to target... he said the Lords first, but in effect, so I thought about it, and it's true. I said a bunch of things that, while true, are not really the best way to explain the situation. So I said if you target Kira twice, those triggers are on the bottom of the stack, but before they can resolve, you have to choose all other targets. Now that's the important part here. I've gotten so used to playing against the Primeval Titan through the Breach version of the deck that I really haven't played against a resolved Scapeshift with a Kira on the board in a long time, if really ever. It's been so long, if it ever happened, that I can't really remember the ins and outs of how it actually goes down. Now the important thing here is that all of the 6 triggers from these mountains need to choose targets at the same time. So Kira's ability exists on all my creatures while that's happening. The way I was thinking about it, again, because I'm so used to playing against the incremental triggers from Primeval Titan attacking with Valakut on the board, that I'm thinking, okay, he can use 2 triggers to kill this creature. Once those resolve, he can choose 2 triggers to kill these creatures. This creature without Kira Shield, 1 without Kira Shield, 1 without Kira Shield. The problem with that, of course, again, is that all of the targets have to be chosen simultaneously, and Kira Shield exists on all of these guys. So as it stands, with her protection, the opponent can really only kill 2 of my creatures. He can throw 2 targets at Kira, and then 3 targets at, or 3 or 4 at one of my Lords. Let's say they throw 3 at this Reejerey. The first one gets countered, and he absolutely needs the remaining 2 to kill my 4/4. 1 other trigger remaining would just get countered by Kira Shield. So it doesn't matter if the opponent puts 3 or 4 onto 1 Lord. The opponent can still, if he targets Kira, he can only kill 1 Lord. A much better option would probably be just to throw 3 triggers at 1 Lord and 3 triggers at another Lord. The first of each set of 3 will get countered, but the 2 remaining will deal 6 damage to each of my 4/4s. And reduce my board, make it a little bit more difficult for me to win the match. Let's go ahead and fast forward through the end of this conversation. So, we're thinking, what's the best you can do here? And probably killing the 2 Reejereys would be the best option. So we decide in the end to play it out. It's an example of, in these kinds of games where there's nothing at stake, but we're trying to play to the best of our abilities, trying to learn as much as we can from our decks. We should talk these things out and try to figure out if we're both playing to the best of our ability, rather than just ending the game. If the opponent says good game and scoops, if I see a line that he could have taken, we could potentially both learn from that. So the opponent does kill both of my Reejereys. He did gain 7 life. He's all the way up at 11 at this point. And he passed the turn to me. I spent a moment just thinking about what my outs are. I think if I drew a Vapor Snag, the opponent would have gone down to 10, and then I could have swung for 3, 3, 2, and 2. So that would have been exact lethal. So I drew a Mutavault for the turn. And my thought here is that the opponent thought that Spreading Seas would have won, but he could still block a Lord in that case and would only still take 8 damage, and I'd be left without an Island Walk Lord for the following turn. ultimately, the problem with the opponent's board state here, and why he's not going to be able to squeak this one out, is when he fetched up his lands after casting Scapeshift, he only got one green source. We see Primeval Titan in his hand. We kind of knew that he drew that since the Courser showed us. And the Scapeshift we see on the top of the deck. He only has one green source. I didn't quite realize this during the game. I thought that my best line was pretty much just to crash in with my creatures. If he blocks the Lord, so be it. He's going to take 8 damage, and I can just keep leaning on the following turn and hope to draw any number of Lords off the top of the deck. So swinging with... I think it's 3, 3, 2, and 2, so it's 6 plus it's 10. I think I calculated that already. The opponent chose to block a Silvergill to prevent 3 damage. He thought he was taking 8, but I had to explain he's actually taking 7. He thought maybe the Mutavault did more damage than it does. So he is ending his turn at 4. He draws that Scapeshift that we saw on the top of the deck. He's going to show me the 2 cards that I already have information about. Confused for a second, I asked him, after thinking about it, why didn't you play the Primeval Titan? He says he didn't have the 2 green sources, and I didn't notice that during the game. He sacked everything and was unable to, didn't play a second Stomping Ground. We can look at his graveyard. We see that he sacrificed 2 Stomping Grounds, but he almost certainly has 4 Stomping Grounds in the deck, so he should have gotten 2 more. I think he was rushing when he resolved Valakut. So many little mistakes that we can make in these games. That's why these replays, I think, are so valuable, to be able to just reinforce good play patterns as much as possible. So let's just think about what would have happened if the opponent had played out Primeval Titan on his turn. Tapped 6 lands to do it. He's got Valakut fully online with 6 mountains, so he would get 2 bolt triggers. If he threw them both at the Lord, then I would be left with Kira and 2 Mutavaults. We see that I top-decked a Lord of Atlantis, but that guy wouldn't get me there through a Primeval Titan. I could play him out. I could activate 1 Mutavault and attack with Kira, or I could just lean on the opponent with Kira. If the opponent attacks with Primeval Titan to get more Valakut triggers, then... If the opponent attacks with Primeval Titan to get more Valakut triggers, then Primeval Titan would be tapped. It wouldn't be a blocker, and I could attack one more time with Kira, or follow up with the Lord and then attack. It's a pretty tight situation if the opponent had another green source. As it stands, the misstep that lost the game in the end was only getting 1 Stomping Ground, which is kind of a stupid way to lose. Scapeshift, it's important to note, still doesn't get him there this game if he has 2 green, because again, he only has 7 lands, and when you sack and bring in 6 mountains, as we saw, you only get access to 6 triggers, so 18 damage wouldn't have been enough to take me down to 0. He could have attacked with the Courser. I would have just blocked and then cracked back for definitely lethal damage. So Primeval Titan would have been an excellent choice, but opponent doesn't have the right mana for it. So as it went, I just activated my creatures and swung in, and the opponent said good games, and I said good games. And it was, in fact, an excellent match, an excellent learning experience. The last sequence where I paused it and let you guys think about the line with AEther Vial and Merrow Reejerey and Negate and Cursecatcher and all of that stuff. Definitely really valuable material to learn from, particularly in this matchup, but just in general, how we consider Kira and Negate, how we value those in different circumstances. So please let me know your thoughts on the matchup in general, on this particular match, on my particular plays. Let me know if you have any interesting sideboard tech against Red-Green Titanshift, because it is a really difficult matchup. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate it, and I'll catch you guys the next time. Thanks very much.